4. And do you want to go live there, Ricky? Good man. If you've got a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 24, and I'm going to read through the first chunk of it just to kind of give us a little bit of background, and then we're going to dive into kind of the latter part of the story, and we're going to walk through it sort of a little bit at a time. We're going on a bit of a journey this morning. So, chapter 24, verse 1, the Word of God. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking spices they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling clothes. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here, but he is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day rise." And they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women who told them these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't know how you feel about surprises. Now, I want to define surprise here, okay? I'm talking about something that cuts against the grain of what you'd expected in a really good way. I'm not talking about shocks here, okay? Now, shocks are something that cut against the grain of what you'd expected, but in a really bad way. I hate shocks. Like, I really hate shocks. But I really quite like surprises. And Lisa says that this makes me a very difficult person to buy for, you know? An upcoming birthday. What shall I get you? Oh, just surprise me. Like, don't shock me. Surprise me. I like surprises. I don't like shocks. And you know when you get something like a surprise that is totally unexpected in a really beautiful way, like it changes your day, doesn't it? But then, you know, if you're in really difficult circumstances and maybe you've had shock after shock, but then a surprise, and just an incredible surprise comes at such a difficult time that totally turns not just your day around, but your whole situation. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about in what we're about to read. Now, the Gospel of Luke was written by a guy, obviously called Luke, who was writing to a friend of his called Theophilus, and he wanted Theophilus to be really convinced that what he was telling him about Jesus was true. And so Luke was a medical doctor, and he went round and he interviewed loads of people and got loads of eyewitness accounts. And eyewitness accounts are really important, aren't they? You know, when I want to know if something's happened, I don't ask somebody if their friend's auntie's dog's cousin Mabel saw it. I want to know, did they see it? And so that's what Luke's done. He's gone and found loads of eyewitnesses, because what he wants Theophilus to be convinced of is that everything that he's telling him really happened. And if it really happened, then it really matters. And if it really mattered then, it still really matters now. Like, this changes our lives. It changes everything, and nothing matters more. And so that's the backdrop to this, okay? There's an empty tomb, and some people are saying that Jesus has risen from the dead, and if that's true, then that changes everything, okay? So that's where we're going. Now, verse 13, we're going to pick up the story. On that very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. Well, what things were they talking about? They were talking about the fact that there was this guy, Jesus, who had been running around kind of healing the sick and raising the dead and telling people that their sins were forgiven and teaching in ways that nobody had ever really heard before. And then, shock, he gets arrested. Despite the fact, I mean, it shouldn't have been a shock, should it? Because Jesus had been telling them, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to suffer many things, I'm going to die, and then I'm going to rise again. So it shouldn't have been a shock, but it was. It was a shock to them. And so they'd witnessed him carrying his own cross. They'd witnessed him being nailed to this cross. They'd witnessed him dying, crying out, "It is finished." They'd witnessed his body taken down, hastily wrapped, thrown into a hole in the rock, and a stone rolled over the entrance. And now, imagine your sadness. This is the guy that you thought was going to turn everything around. and he's dead. But now, you've got people that are going around saying, well, we went to the tomb and it was empty. There was no body there. And so suddenly, the ripples that have gone out from that day, the shockwaves that you've been experiencing, the deep sadness now shifts into a confusion. Like, what the heck is going on? And so these guys now are on this journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and they're having a conversation as they go. And just to give us a little bit of a context here, so they're going from Jerusalem to Emmaus. It's about 7 miles. It's about the distance from Merthyr Town Centre to Tredegar. Okay. Now, imagine that's where they're going, but they're going on the old road because if they're walking on the A465, there's too much traffic and it's going to be a bit dangerous, okay? So they're going on the old road. It's pretty poorly lit. But anyway, they get up to about Dowless Top in their walk, all right? I'm just trying to give us a little bit of a feel for where they are, okay? It takes about 3.5 hours, or maybe 3 hours if you're a faster walker, although the hill up to Dowless is quite steep, isn't it? And so, like, you're imagining they're going to be a bit out of puff at the top, and they're kind of lamenting over all of these things. And while they were together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. It was that lovely bit in the video, wasn't it, where the two guys were walking along the road, and then all of a sudden, like, Jesus appears. And Jesus appears, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. Now, the question is, why didn't they recognize him? Now, was he wearing one of these kind of, glasses, nose, and mustache sets? Like, this is kind of Jesus incognito. Why don't they recognize him? And you think, are these guys really thick? They've been following him for 3 years. Why don't they recognize him? But look at the words. It says, their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And actually, the phrase is even stronger than that. It's their eyes were placed under a strong grasp. Somebody's actually, like, grabbing their eyes, putting a mask over them, and stopping them from seeing what's in front of their face. Now, question, who is it that's actually stopping them from seeing? Because it's not their fault. Come on, let's have a guess. Who is stopping them from seeing who Jesus is? Jesus. Jesus is stopping them from seeing who Jesus is. Now you think, well, why would he do that? Well, the thing is, sometimes our eyes let us down. And we're living in the age of, like, deep fake AI stuff, aren't we? Can we actually believe what our eyes are telling us, right? Now, these guys have just seen, and they've filtered everything that they know through their experience of the world. And so they're trying to understand what's taken place, but they don't have a framework. They don't have a way of understanding what they've seen. And so Jesus wants them to start to see with inside eyes. He wants them not to rely on the evidence of what they see and how they understand the world to work. He wants them to see with inside eyes. He wants to change the way that they understand the world. Because the thing is, seeing isn't always believing. Lisa mentioned this a few weeks back. We have a very, very close family member who, you think, well, if I experienced miraculous healing, like, then I'd believe. This very, very close family member experienced, like, what can only be described as an incredible medical miracle, like, testified by doctors. He won't believe. He's seen it, but he won't believe. Seeing isn't always believing. And Jesus wants them, and he wants us to see. He wants us to grasp who he is in our inner people, because then when we believe who he is, then we start to see. The thing is, seeing only takes you so far. So Jesus, like, comes alongside them, and they're probably just past the little industrial units by this point. They're out onto the sort of the countryside bit there. And he says, what is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk along the road? What is that phrase, What is this conversation that you're having with each other? And it's almost like, this stranger has just invaded their conversation. And they stood, still looking sad. Do you know, I love that little detail, because this is where Jesus is. This is where you find Jesus, where you find people who are sad and confused and who don't understand what's going on. That's where you find Jesus. That's where he inserts himself into the situation. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know these things that have happened there in these days?" Like, stranger, are you thick? Like, everybody else knows what's going on here. Why don't you know? And he said to them, what things? You've got to love the way that Jesus kind of plays this situation. What things? Come, tell me. Tell me all about it. And they said to him concerning Jesus of Nazareth. Now, guys, are you not hit by the irony of this, right? So Jesus says, well, what things have been going on? Well, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who has stood right there with them, and they're telling Jesus about himself. Anyway, concerning of Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. That's who they saw him as. That's what their eyes led him to see, that he was a prophet, mighty in word and deed before God and all people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things have taken place. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back, saying that they had seen a vision of angels. Loved the angels on the video, by the way. They did such a good job of angeling. Who said that he was alive. Some of these who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. They didn't see yet. This was what they saw with physical eyes. They saw a prophet, somebody who spoke the words of God. Someone who taught in ways that they never heard anyone teach. They saw these mighty deeds, and yet they still saw him just as a prophet. They didn't see him as anything more significant than that. They'd hoped that he might be the one to redeem Israel, but they weren't quite sure. And they'd missed the point because they were expecting a mighty king and not a servant who got executed. And you know, lots of people kind of see Jesus in part, don't they? I mean, the number of conversations that I've had down the years where it's like, well, you know, you're Jesus. And it always starts with, you know, you're Jesus. Well, actually, yes, he is my Jesus because that's what he's made himself. But you know, you're Jesus. Like, yeah, you know, he says lots of really cool things, you know. I love his moral teaching around the world. If I do lots of the things that Jesus says, then maybe I'll have a successful life. Well, yes, that's part of the point. You know, you kind of get in there. Yeah, but he's not really more than that, is he? You know, he taught really well and he did some really good things, but he wasn't really God, was he? Of course, he wasn't really God. And actually, when you only see Jesus in part, how can you lay down your life to follow him? Because you don't understand that what he gives you is his life in return. And Jesus wants us to believe who he is so that we really see. Because he's so much more than these people had pegged him for. He wants them and he wants us to believe who he is so that we really see who he is. Now, I've often wondered, what was Jesus' tone of voice when he says this? Because it sounds quite harsh, doesn't it? Oh, foolish ones and slow of heart to believe. All that the prophets have spoken. I don't think it was that. I think it was a much more, foolish, oh, bless, you know? Much more than berating them. Oh, foolish ones, slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ, God's chosen King, Messiah, must suffer these things and then enter into his glory? Now, Jesus is about to kind of turn their view of what it means for him to be Messiah, what it means for him to be king, upside down. He's going to change their worlds. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. It's definitely one of the top 10 most frustrating verses in the Bible, right? Luke, why didn't you tell us everything that he said? Why didn't you list the whole thing? That would have been an amazing sermon. Best sermon ever. You know, I would have just preached that every week, you know, just read that out over and over again on repeat but he didn't tell us. He just gives us this kind of short sentence that is, it's almost like this smoked brownie with salted caramel sauce that's about 3,000 calories a slice. This sentence is about 3,000 calories a slice, isn't it? It's so rich. It's so dense. There's so much packed in there. And we want to milk it for every ounce every calorie that we can from it. Because basically what Jesus is going to do is he's going to walk them through. Now, bear in mind, they've got pretty much from, I reckon, Rumney Bridge to the center of Tredegar to get the rest of this story in. And so he's just kind of relaying how he is the kind of the fulfillment of everything that they know in the Old Testament. You know the Jesus Storybook Bible? If you've never read a Bible, right? Start with the Jesus Storybook Bible because it is so cool. Like, it's a kid's Bible, and yet it's not at the same time. And its strapline is, every story whispers his name. Because every story does whisper his name. And so Jesus now, in this journey from Rumney Bridge to Tredegar, is going to take them through the rest of the story. And he's going to show them, like almost like in flashback form, like how he is actually in every part of this story. He's going to show them how he's not writing himself into the story. He was always the story. He was always the center of it. And so in the beginning, he's the one that God speaks the world into existence through. When Adam and Eve choose to listen to the voice of the snake, he's the one that is promised as the one who will crush the serpent's head. He's the one who will come as the rescuer, the redeemer. When Abraham is selected out as the chosen one that's going to bring blessing to the world, Jesus is the focal point of that blessing. When Moses leads God's people out from slavery to Egypt, into the desert, into freedom, Jesus is the one who's going to bring about the true and better exodus for all mankind. When David's kingdom is established and God says to David, there's always going to be a descendant of yours seated on the throne. Jesus is the descendant of David who will always be seated on the throne because the kingdoms of this world will be the kingdom of our God because he is king forever. When the kingdom falls apart and crumbles, the prophets promise a rescuer and a redeemer, and this rescuer is Jesus. And this rescuer, as Isaiah promises, is going to be a suffering servant who will give up his life, who will die to redeem God's people. And that promise was a flash forward to Jesus carrying the cross. And so Jesus now takes them back through this whole story, and he says, there I am, there I am, there I am, there I am again. Oh, look, and there's me. He's pointing himself out in all of this story. He takes them through the scriptures to show them what they should have been expecting. They should have known this. Like, they should have got this. But they weren't expecting him to be this kind of king, and they needed their inside eyes opening to the truth of a king who rules by serving, who wins by losing, and who lives through dying. And so it's almost the end of the journey now. They're kind of heading into Tredegar Town Centre. And it's almost like now they're ready to see him. Now they're ready for the big reveal that Jesus is going to give them. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going further. Why? It's like, Jesus, are you just toying with these people? You know? Are you yanking their chains? You know? Are you pulling their legs? No, he's not. The thing is with Jesus, he never forces his kingship on anyone. And he never forces his love on anyone. But he loves the invitation. And you give him the invitation and bang, he's there. He's there. And so they urged him strongly to stay, saying, stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent. So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at table with them, he took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And this moment, because of what had happened just a few nights earlier, on the night before he was crucified, when he broke bread with his disciples, this breaking of bread now has a whole new significance. It has a whole new meaning. He broke it and he gave it to them, and their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. They were ready. They were ready to see who he is. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And this is like all of a sudden, like all of the clues that have been building up. It's like one of those films where, you know, you get to the end of the film and they show you lots of the rest of the film in flashback to show you that you really should have known what was going on. Now, I don't feel bad about doing this, okay, because this film is very, very old. But you know the film The Sixth Sense? So when it came out, like I remember going into the cinema and as I was coming out, somebody was saying, oh, and I didn't realize that the main guy was dead all the way through the film. Well, thanks. Thank you very much. Because you get to the end of the film, and what you have, like when it drops on the main character that he's been dead through the whole film, and then it goes in flashback to show you how you should have realized that he was dead. He should have realized that he was dead all the way through the film. I mean, it's a pretty simple thing. Are you dead? Yes, I am. Like he should have twigged to this. But what we've just gone through is a story where the main character is dead and then becomes alive. And he's showing everybody else how you should have seen that this was always pointing to me. And then when their eyes are open, then they get it. This is him. And this whole story, this whole world, everything in this universe is pointing to him. Everything belongs to him. And once they've seen it, they can't unsee it. Now, I'm not going to do this morning, but if I were to dance up here this morning, that would be something. And how much will you pay me? I don't dance for free, I'll have you know. But if I were to dance up here this morning, I guarantee you that it would be burned on your retinas for the rest of your lives. You would never forget it. And in the same way, these guys, what they've seen, they now can't unsee. All of a sudden, everything makes sense. And everything wouldn't make sense if I did a dance up here this morning. You'd be thoroughly confused. But everything makes sense to them. They get it. All of a sudden, bang, 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 they can see who Jesus is. And they can see the whole story has all been leading up to him. This king, this rescuer who would suffer and die for the sake of the world so that they could be drawn back into relationship with God, so that the whole creation could be renewed, so that everything could be made new. And they believe. He speaks to them, and they believe, and when they believe, then they see. Then they get it. And they can't unsee it. And when you really see something so incredible, there's a response to that. I love their description. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" When Jesus speaks, when he really shows us who he is, it begins to do something in us. It begins to change us from the inside out. And so what are they going to do about this? Well, there's got to be a response, doesn't there? And bear in mind now, it's night. We already know it's night because they said the day is far gone. What do? They get straight back on the road. They're back on the old road. And bear in mind, there's no streetlights there. This is dangerous. There are bandits. There are hidden dangers all the way along that road from Emmaus back to Jerusalem. There's a reason why people didn't walk at night. But these guys don't care. They're gone. They're on the road, and they're running, and it didn't take them 3 hours and 37 minutes. They were going full tilt. It was like Nick and Caleb's 10K this morning. They were gone. They were on it because they've got news to share. We must tell. He is alive. And here's the thing, if this is true, if we're not a bunch of nutters, if it's like Tim Mackey says, as Christians, we do some pretty strange things if this isn't true. We gather together weekly at least, sometimes more than that, but we gather together at least weekly, and we sing songs to someone that we can't see. And then we devote our lives to ancient Israelite texts, and we live our lives based around those. Now, if Jesus isn't real, and if this never happened, and if this is not true, we are all bonkers. We have all turned the corner. We should all just pack up and go home if this isn't true. But if this really happened, if this really happened, then it really matters. And the fact is that it did really happen. And so it means that we are of the most sane people in the whole history of the world because we are most lined up with reality. And these guys who were doing their full tilt sprint from Emmaus back to Jerusalem, these are the most sane people in the world because they are basing their lives on ultimate truth. They are basing their lives on what is ultimately true. And so, if If the God-man entered into the world, if God came into a world that was so broken and became one of us to show us the kind of people that we were actually created to be, to show us the image that we were created to bear, to show us what the world was meant to be, if he showed us his love in such an incredible fashion, if he really gave up his life, if he carried in himself all of the evil and the brokenness and the sin and the corruption of humanity, if he really absorbed all of that into himself, if he really did that, if he rose from the dead, and if he now holds the keys of death and Hades in his hands, if he has ascended to the right hand of God, and if he is seated at the throne of all rule and power and authority, and if he has really invited us by faith to place our lives under him, in him, to be united in him, to find true life, then that changes everything. Everything. And the thing is, this is true. This is so true. And every one of you that has experienced this, you know it's true. And there is nothing that anybody in this world can tell you that would convince you that this is not true, because it is. The facts stack up, and then our experience stacks up next to that. He is real. He is alive. He has made us alive. This is Resurrection Sunday. Because he is alive, so we are alive. Oh, church, this is good. And you know, when he really speaks, when he opens our eyes, he makes our hearts burn. And sometimes, because we still live in a world that is so kind of afflicted by death, because we're living in this in-between, in many ways, we're living in Easter Saturday, aren't we? You know, our real experience of life is that we're living in this in-between, that actually the full redemption of the earth and the cosmos has all been purchased, but we're still awaiting that full resurrection day. Yet the fact is that full resurrection day is coming, and the resurrection of Jesus guarantees that. And that's already breaking in to the now. He has already invited us to take part in that now. And so even while we're still experiencing so much Saturday, Sunday is coming and Sunday is breaking in. And if Sunday is breaking in, then we are of all people on this earth to be most joyful. And you know if you're here this morning and you've never given your life to Jesus, like clearly you can't think that we're that nuts, because you're here. And you know if you're here, just like Jesus did with the guys on the road, he might act like he's walking by, but he's not really. He's waiting for the invitation. And you give him the invitation, bang, he's in. And he breaks bread with you. And he comes in to eat with you. And he comes in to transform you. And he comes in to change you because he loves you. And he loves you because he loves you because he's love. Oh my gosh, church, this is so amazing. And if you haven't given your life to him, please do it today. Please do it today. Nobody's going to force you to. Even Jesus doesn't force you to. So how can we? This is an invitation. Come and have life in him. And then you know if you have given your life to him, you are of all people on earth to be most joyful. Because our joy is not anchored in our circumstances. Our joy is anchored in the objective reality of who he is in us, with us, and for us, and what one day he will accomplish. And so I want to encourage you this morning that if you've given your life to Jesus, then go tell. Go tell. Just like these guys, get on the road. Go tell as many people as you can. And it's the only rational thing to do. It's the only reasonable thing to do, that if you have life in you and you have the source of life, go tell. Go tell people. And don't worry if they think that you're nuts. Let Jesus convince people. He's big enough. And then what we are going to do this morning, actually, yes, I am going to say this. You know, as we celebrate this morning, I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but you know, as we celebrate, you know, if you want to give very brief testimony of how he opened your eyes, come give testimony, because it's all glory to him. So tell. We're going to remember as we come to this table now, this is the meal which he's commanded us, where the bread was broken. And in the breaking of bread, so we ask that he would open our eyes even more to see the wonder of who he is and what he's done and what he continues to do and what he one day will do. We come to a cup that reminds us of his blood, the cup of redemption, the cup where people are redeemed because his blood has been poured out to cleanse us from all sin. And so we're going to come to the table and we're going to remember as he commanded us. And then we're going to celebrate. We are of all people on earth the ones who have the most to celebrate. And so that's what we're going to do.